Good afternoon, everyone. It is an incredible honor to welcome to my first virtual Chautauqua, David Newell, AKA Mr. McFeeley from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Mr. Newell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me here. I'm glad to be on your first virtual Chautauqua. That's I guess historic for both of us, right?
It absolutely is.
And before we start, John, I'm gonna maybe your Chautauqua viewers will recognize me a little bit more if I put on the hat and then show them what I look like when the costume is on. That is Mr. McFeeley, Speedy Delivery. So I thought I'd show you that much. And by the way, if anybody would like one of these pictures, I can sign it. All that you have to do is collect the names and send me a list, and I'll send them to you.
Oh,
you can make the Speedy Delivery.
That would be incredible.
That is me in my costume, and this is one of the original hats that I have here in my office. Oh, and behind me, before we start, you can see right there, that is one of Mr. Rogers' sweaters that he gave me years ago. And I had them in our closet upstairs, hanging in our bedroom closet. And my wife said, you better put those in a plastic bag because they're wool. So I did. And I didn't even know my son knew they were in our closet. And for my birthday 2 years ago, he snuck out the sweater to a framer and had it done and surprised me. And there it is. There's my really a touchstone. I see it every day, and it just brings back a lot of memories. It's one of them. Not, he had about 15, and that's one that I think this one was made not by his mother. Some of them were made by his mother, the first ones, but this one was machine made, and we used it towards the end of the series, but it had some flaw in it that we couldn't use it again. And he said, here's a memento for you. Anyhow, that's the story of the sweater.
that is not your run-of-the-mill everyday memento, is it?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
As memorabilia goes, I think the term priceless.
Probably.
And I can't even imagine the value of something like that.
I don't know if you can even put a value on something like that. One of the sweaters, one of the originals is in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And that was installed, that was installed probably in the late 90s when there was an installation service. When they take in new products or new mementos, they have a ceremony. And I was at the ceremony with Fred, and we have footage of that, but it's a red sweater, something like this, only redder. And it's in the pop culture section of the Smithsonian. So if anybody's ever in DC, they may stop by and see if they can see it.
And that's a wonderful museum. And I'm going out of order already because of something that you said. Tell us about, you mentioned your wife.
Yes.
Tell us how you met your wife.
Okay, I'm going to take my hat off and I'll be David Newell now. We met at the station at WQED. There is a public television station in Pittsburgh called WQED, and that's one of the stations of the system around the country. And that's where we produced Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I was there for about 10 years, and about 10 years into the run of the program, one of the staff members left, and Fred Rogers hired my wife. I mean, I didn't know her. She came in for an interview, and she got the job, and so we worked together for years, and that's how we met. And sometimes she would go with me when I do appearances, and she would wear the purple panda costume. You know the purple panda, right?
You're getting ahead on my questions, but okay. Go ahead and do it.
Okay, well, your question must have been something about the panda, right?
That is correct. Where did it come from?
Well, it came from Fred's imagination, first of all. The Purple Planet was in somewhere in the neighborhood of make-believe in Fred's fantasy. And on the Purple Planet, Lady Elaine took a trip to the Purple Planet, Lady Elaine being one of the puppets. And on the planet Purple, everything was purple. The people were purple, everything was purple. The pandas were purple. And she brought Panda, according to the script, back to the neighborhood of make-believe to live in the neighborhood of make-believe. But the symbolism behind the Purple Planet was everything is the same there. And Fred was using that as sort of a touchstone to explain about, how boring that would be if everybody looked the same and acted the same and had the same names. He was really starting to teach children about appreciation of differences. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the origin of the panda, the sort of the theory behind it, or the explanation of it. But he became a character that kids identify with. So when I go out to appearances, I would take the panda with me, and sometimes my wife would go in the early days until our first child was born. And then I would solicit people from the local public station to wear the costume or something like that. But the panda, oh, by the way, the panda, as you probably know, there's a follow-up to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Have you heard about that?
You go right ahead and talk about question number 7.
Okay.
You're getting them all at once.
And Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is a daily program produced by the Fred Rogers Company that's on public television. And it's an offshoot of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Daniel being sort of the Mr. Rogers character. Now there's going to be another, it's in production, and I don't know the official title, but it stars Donkey Hody. Donkey is the first name and Hody's the last name.
Oh my.
You get the connection, right? Donkey Hody. And Purple Panda will be the stars of that show. And it'll come on PBS or maybe some network, PBS or another. But at any rate, it'll be a follow-up again to the neighborhood, or an offshoot, or spin-off is what they call it. The Purple Panda will be in that. So the panda started, on the neighborhood, and is now having his own program, so to speak.
Will you be a part of that show?
I don't know. It's actually all puppets. The Daniel Tiger, if some of your viewers may know it, it's animation. And this one will be all live action puppets, like the ones in the neighborhood of make-believe. But I think they'll be redesigned. I haven't seen any of it. I've because it's being produced at a studio in Chicago, and I think because of the COVID, it's not, they shut down for a while, but I think it's scheduled for 2021, sometime in the fall of 2021, but you'll hear about it. So my point being that from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, there's been a lot of spin-offs taking his legacy on, and at the same time, the neighborhood is still available on a lot of public stations. They're showing it, but there is now, and maybe you know this, PBS Kids has a streaming service, and you can watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on your computer by getting an app. You have to get an app for PBS Kids, and then you find the program you want to watch, and Mr. Rogers is available on that too. So you can get up at 3 o'clock in the morning now and watch the neighborhood if you like. So your viewers, I hope, if they've never seen Mr. Rogers, there's a chance to go back and see it or revisit it or whatever.
That's a great idea, because of course we'll get into the documentaries and the movie, of course, but so many people are fans of the newer documentaries and the movie, and they haven't even seen the show.
That's true.
Yeah.
And those who've seen it or haven't seen it for a while, the documentary and the film had a resurgence of interest in the neighborhood. It's almost as popular now, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, as it was when it was originally aired. It's gotten a lot of international publicity. And I'm sitting in, this is my office. I have a lot of memorabilia in it, but I'm getting letters uh, from around the country to answer. People who say just what you did that a little earlier, said that you watched the program as an adult too. You discovered it when you were in your teens, you told me. And some are doing that. Some have discovered it through their children. Some watched it when they were children. All versions of stories I'm getting, they're wonderful, but it keeps me pretty busy answering all the letters because I try to do it by hand.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it's a slow process, but I'm getting through them. Again, my point is the popularity of the program. They're still interested in what they saw when they were a child, and how the program what impact the program had on them growing up. And every letter says that, how important it was for them, and it made them what they are today. That's sort of a general statement in the letters.
And to follow up with that, wouldn't it be fair to say that one of the unique aspects of the show, I would imagine the stories that you hear is almost like a uniquely personal relationship that they have felt with the show and the characters, even more so than those who are nostalgic about an old movie or an old TV show.
Oh, you're right. You're exactly right. That's what I get from the letters. It's like writing to an old friend who you knew as a child and you were separated for a while and then you reconnect. That you're right, and it's not the same thing. It's not nostalgia. Well, some of them may be, but it's you have to read some of them. They're really a sensitive letter, and what they're asking, and some just write the letter to say hello. Some want to have a picture. Some send pictures in, and I'm getting this too. I'll get pictures or photograph snapshots that were taken years ago when I was meeting somebody at a mall somewhere. In fact, there was a mall outside of Indianapolis, actually. There was a mall somewhere in Indianapolis, and I met this child he was 4 or 5, and he sent me a picture of us together in the crowd at the mall. And I do remember. I remember a lot of the appearances I did over the years. And my point again being that it's like sending a photo to your cousin or your brother or sister. No, you're right. I never thought of it in that way, but it's true. It's not nostalgia as much as it is a connection through television. And I saw it on YouTube. Somebody used 4 examples of Bob Ross was one, and let's see, Mr. Rogers was another, LeVar Burton was another, and I forget the 4th person, but they said, here are pictures of 4 teachers, and they all did it virtually, on television. And when you stop to think of it, Fred Rogers was teaching virtually 50 years ago. He was really ahead of his time, not only in the broadcasting or the way he used the current media of the day, but also in subjects and in topics. He was ahead of his time, I think.
I agree. And if you go back, one of the things, and I've seen, of course, the show so many times, the documentaries, the movie, and I'm sure it's there somewhere, but can you take us back to the early days of you and Fred and where you met and how that connection, and because really it seems like in the show everyone has a strong relationship, but the two of you had a particularly unique relationship.
Yeah, you mean how I first came to the program, how I got the
Yeah,
job?
yes.
Well, uh, I'll start from the beginning if you don't mind hearing it all.
Oh,
But
absolutely not.
I in the summer of 1967, I was in Europe, and I had gone to Europe to see my cousin, visit my cousin who was living in London, and he was working for the US government in London, and he had married, so he stayed there in London. So I went over to visit him, and I did for about a week. And then I met a friend who was on a scholarship, and he was winding up a scholarship. We were going to tour around Europe, which we did, then come back together. He lived in Pittsburgh. So that's what happened. But a couple days before we were coming back, we went to the American Express office. Back then, that's how you got your messages. There were no cell phones, no computers. You either long distance phone called or you got a telegram. And so I went to the American Express, and there was a telegram from a mutual friend of Fred Rogers and mine saying Fred Rogers is taking Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He's gotten some funding to take it national, and I have given your name, meaning my name, to Fred Rogers for an interview. Because up to that point, I was working at a local theater, called the Pittsburgh Playhouse, and working with children and teaching and stage managing, doing everything. And I was going back to that job until the telegram arrived, and I met Fred, and he talked to me for about an hour without even asking me questions about my abilities or my experience. We just talked about travel because I had just come back from Europe, and he told me about for his first trip to Europe, and so many different things. And after about an hour, he said, "When can you start?" And that was Fred's way of finding out if I was going to fit into what he was planning. That was his way. He knew that I would fit into the staff he was creating. And I did. And I thought, well, I have a job for a year. And here I am talking to you 52 years later, something like that. And I never thought I'd be there more than a year. I thought, television, they're season by season. And we did 130 programs that first season.
Wow.
In black and white. And then everything started changing to color. And then we did 65 programs for the rest of the series for the next maybe, 20 years. I can't remember exactly. And oh yes, and here's how I got into Mr. McFeeley. The job that I was being interviewed for was a staff position, but I was going to be in charge of all the props and costumes, coordinating, making sure everything was ready for each show. And yes, that was the job I was hired for. But he said, oh, by the way, before you leave, I also want you to play a part that I'm writing into the scripts. He wrote his own material. And it's going to be a delivery man, and I want you to play that. And you can deliver a prop instead of me bringing in everything. He was expanding the show, adding more characters, adding more scenes, taking it out of one set into locations. We were expanding it. That's what I'd like you to do. And you'll be a delivery man who's always in a hurry, and sort of elderly. And that was what he told me. So he said, and here's the scripts. He had 2 weeks of scripts written already. And he said, you might as well start, and I'll see you in a week. Why don't you start reading through them, and why don't you make a list of things that we need for these shows, and we'll meet at a production meeting a week from now, and we'll go over and we'll plan, et cetera, et cetera. And here I am.
Well, and speaking of the McFeeley and Mr. McFeeley, that was Fred's middle name, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. But here's how it actually came about. In the script, the delivery man's name was not McFeeley at the time, because the scripts that I had, the delivery man's name was Mr. McCurdy.
Oh my.
And McCurdy was the name of the president of the Sears Roebuck Foundation, the man who authorized the money to be donated to produce the programs. In part, they didn't give all the money, but they gave a good part of the money. And so Fred was, since he wrote his own scripts, he was saying thank you to Mr. McCurdy, you know, and naming a character after Mr. McCurdy. Well, we were starting the first taping. That was it. I had all of the costumes and everything was in place. I was in the first script. I got into my costume. I was standing. We had about 10 minutes to go before we were going to tape. The phone rang, and in the control room, and it was for Fred. And it was Mr. McCurdy calling to wish us well with the initial taping. And he told Fred, oh, you know, we love the concept and like your ideas, et cetera, et cetera. But he said one thing: please don't call the delivery man Mr. McCurdy. I think they thought it was too close, too self-serving, maybe. I don't know. And Fred said, okay, we'll take care of that. And he came back in the studio. I could tell that he was thinking about something. And he came up to me and said, we're not to call you Mr. McCurdy. We have to get, and before he finished the sentence, he said, McFeeley, that's your name, McFeeley. Because I guess McCurdy, MC McCurdy, MC McFeeley, and his name and his grandfather's name. He said, you're now Mr. McFeeley. And the director said, well, I guess we're ready to tape. So we taped. I delivered an armadillo in that first program, an armadillo being a South American animal with an armor over. It's a very strange prehistoric looking animal, not very big, but still prehistoric looking. At any rate, he talked about the animal and so forth. I said, well, I have to get it back to the zoo now, Mr. Rogers. We packed it up. And as I left, I sort of ad-libbed. I said, well, Speedy Delivery, Mr. Rogers, Speedy Delivery. And he said, Speedy Delivery, Mr. McFeeley. And off I went. And that's how the Speedy Delivery began. And the first time McFeeley was used. So that's a little trivia for you.
Oh, that was literally my next question. Where did the line Speedy Delivery? I had no idea.
Yes, because the company that I have on the program is a one-man company, and on the jacket, you probably remember, and on the hat too, it says Speedy Delivery.
Yeah.
And so I figured, oh, well, that's the name of the company. That was on the hat, that was on the jacket. So as I was leaving, I said, well, Speedy Delivery. And it's become sort of a catchphrase. It's an all-purpose phrase like shalom or something. Shalom is, or non or something like that. It can mean hello, goodbye, good day, how are you, everything. Speedy Delivery, good health, whatever. So I use it a lot. If I had a penny for every time I said Speedy Delivery over these past 50 years, at any rate, it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience working for the program.
It is on that first episode, and of course, that's where Speedy Delivery, but of course, you got the little motion there with your finger there. What was that? Was that scripted or was that you again?
Me again, I think. And I always, I think that was me at that point, just sort of doing some Speedy Delivery. Like there was almost a wave goodbye somehow. I don't know. It just came out of nowhere, I guess. But over the years, we would do live appearances. And Fred never wanted to do a big theater with 3,000 people. He liked to do little intimate appearances. So we did them in television studios, PBS studios, and people would be invited to come to meet Mr. Rogers and some of the cast at groups of 200 at a time, very intimate. But it would take us all day to do these, or all weekend. You know, by the time you get 3,000 people, you do about 20 shows, but we did. And I we did a weekend, and I remember we did about 20 shows, 25, 30 shows in those 2 days. Uh, and we came down to the last one, and I would say I came back to the back of the behind the scenes and say, one more, Mr. Rogers, one more to go, because I'd be the person out in the studio welcoming all the families into the studio. I'd get them seated, then I'd start introducing people and just getting them warmed up, so to speak. And Johnny Costa, our musician, was there. He would play a little overture, and then we would bring Fred out. And sometimes the cast members would change, but I'd always be there. Lady Aberlin was with us a lot, and Francois Clemens. We all shifted on and off, but basically it was the three of us plus Fred and Johnny Costa. We do these shows. This is a long-winded explanation, but that's how this came about. Speedy Delivery, because Fred, I would say one more, and then Fred started to pick it up. And in the morning, he'd come into my office and peek into the office and say, good morning, good morning. So it became sort of a wave or a hello or connected with Speedy Delivery. I don't know if all that rambling has made sense, but has
perfect.
it?
Perfect. Absolutely. You know, and you mentioned Fred, and I can just see him coming in to greet you every morning. I think one of the things that people have a tough time grasping is he was so genuine, that
Yes.
he really was the real deal.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. There was no, well, in fact, his wife got the question most of the times, what's Mr. Rogers like at home? You know, they thought, oh, he's an entirely different person. But no, her answer always would be, because it was true. She couldn't answer it any other way except what you see is what you get. That was Fred. He was the person you see on television. Now, his pace on television was a little slower because of young children, but basically that was Fred. It came out of him. That was Fred. And he wrote all of his material, all the scripts, all the songs, the music he wrote it all. There were some people, so we had a few writers who would write some scripts as we went through the seasons, but I would say 95% of what was on the program, Fred Rogers wrote. And I don't know if I've told you this before or you've read about it, but every Tuesday he'd have a meeting with a child development specialist from the University of Pittsburgh, and her name is Dr. Margaret McFarland.
Mm-hmm.
And she was his mentor, and he took her class. He had his undergrad was in music, and he had a master's of divinity. And along with that master's of divinity, he had 2 years of child development, and all of that was wrapped together. And he was assigned to observe children at the University of Pittsburgh Child Care Center. And Margaret McFarland was in charge of the department. My point being that every Tuesday when Fred had script meetings with Dr. McFarland, she would go over the scripts that he wrote to see how they fit into the appropriateness of a preschooler's comprehension. And and they recorded those sessions too on audio tape, and no one has heard them. We have them all, but there's one person on staff now who's transcribing them, and they'll be going into the Fred Rogers Center. I don't know if you know of the Fred Rogers Center that's located on the campus of St. Vincent College in Pennsylvania. It's near Latrobe, Pennsylvania. It's called the Fred Rogers Center, and anybody, if you're doing a research paper or something on child development on television, on children's television, can access a lot of their archives. It's all related to Fred Rogers, but in some cases there's other studies there about children and television. but mainly it's everything related to Fred. So we are keeping the legacy in a archive,
That's
and it's used quite often. There's an archivist there, and the director. There's about 5 people who look over that collection, and continually people are adding to it. In fact, last week I had a phone call from a viewer who had collected Mr. Rogers toys and books, and they said, I'd love to donate these somewhere. I said, well, why don't you donate them to the Fred Rogers Center, because you have a lot of material there that you can't find anymore, because once a line of toys is sold, they don't tend to keep making it. They just disappear, or somebody's got them in their attic. And this woman did. She had a lot of the toys that her children played with, and she collected. And so right now I have 5 boxes in my garage that I need to take to the Fred Rogers Center. So if anybody has any memorabilia they'd like to donate, and they don't want to give it to the uh, charity somewhere, they can always donate it to the Fred Rogers Center.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. You talk about the value. Of course, much has been written and said about how he resonated with young children and preschoolers and all of you. But one of the things that I found interesting later in his life is how he resonated with adults. And I think an example to me, he was frequently asked to give commencement speeches.
Yes.
Well, you don't typically ask the star of a preschool show to give a college commencement speech. Why do you
No,
think that was a whole new level for
it was, but Fred was a scholar. He knew his subject, and he studied. He was continually studying and reading on about children, along with Margaret. And each script that he wrote, he learned so much about. But yes, the first degree he got was, there was a college in Pennsylvania called Teal, and they asked him to speak at their commencement. That was back in the early 70s, I believe. And since then, up until his very last commencement speech and honorary degree was Middlebury in Vermont. That was the year before he passed away. And so all told, he did about 45 of those. He
Wow.
did he did Yale, he did the University of Pittsburgh, Connecticut. Oh, I just can't name them all, but there are a lot of 45. And you're right. And I think one time, it was a university somewhere in the South, uh, they announced that Fred Rogers was going to be their commencement speaker and receive an honorary degree. And in the school paper, one student said, "Well, wait, why, Mr. Rogers? We're teenagers now. We're college students. What?" And he they published a letter, and it got picked up in the local newspaper. And but Fred went down, and afterwards he said, "I'd like to meet the student who wrote that letter." And he did, and he talked to them. And the student, after he heard his speech, he knew that they picked the right person to speak. Because when you think of it, it makes perfect sense, because these kids who were in that graduating class went through they began with watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He was the perfect speaker, I thought. And his speeches were always written geared to that particular school. They weren't canned. There may be a paragraph or two he'd switch around, but basically they were all aimed to that particular situation. He was a wonderful speaker. Oh, and I remember one time we were in it was a state school, and it was in Virginia somewhere. and they had the commencement in the football field. It's huge. You know how big football fields are.
Oh yeah.
And it was filled, and they put folding chairs on the field, and then they sat in the stands too. And I thought, oh boy, oh this is gonna, are they gonna? And you could hear a pin drop in that stadium. And during his speech, he always asked. It depended on his time frame, but he always asked at least a minute of silence.
I love
Let's
it when
take.
he does that.
Oh, you know what I mean? That you
Oh yes.
well, and I said, oh boy, let's because 10,000 people gather or more. There's always a rumble. Uh, at any rate, he said, let's take 1 minute to think about the people who helped you as you were growing. I'm paraphrasing, but basically that's what he said. And he said that all watch the time. So he had his wristwatch and he would watch it. And the stadium, you could hear a pin drop. He's so quiet. And at the end of a minute, he said, wherever you are, wherever he would, it was a wonderful, very dramatic, but very sincere. He meant it. He's done it. That he kept in every speech because it made a point. He was a very good speaker, very good. And I think there weren't too many letters afterwards when the word got around that Fred Rogers was going to speak at the commencement. And he would start out with A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And of course, all the students knew the song. So it was really thrilling to be with him. And as the years went on, my job would change from being in production behind the scenes. I always did McFeeley, but then it changed to associate producer. And then I was in charge of all the public relations for the program. And I'd be the gatekeeper, so to speak, that I'd get the phone calls, I would arrange interviews, I'd go with him when he would have speeches and just run interference. So I've heard practically all of his speeches and his appearances, and I'd go with him when he was on the Tonight Show and make sure everything was okay, and interviews and set them up, and it was fascinating. And when he couldn't do something, I mean, the phone rang off the hook all the time. When he couldn't do a speech or an appearance, there was another person in our office who had her degree in child development, Hedda Sharapin, and sometimes Hedda would go out and speak for Fred, or I would go for the more of the children's events because we would help him out as best we could, but we couldn't. You couldn't do it all, but he would try to do as much as he could. But he was busy. He was writing the scripts, and not only did he write the scripts, but then he had to perform them. So he was in the studio a lot of that time and was unable to go out and speak. But he did manage to do and I think he liked I know he liked the commencement, because here was a group of students who basically were his viewers, 15 years earlier. And he was seeing them graduate. And it meant a lot to him, I think. The chance to meet, and he would do his best to meet some of the students afterwards. He would stay around, but you can't meet 10,000 people all at one time. But he would do his best when he'd be walking back to the dressing room, so to speak, and students would be coming with their families. He'd always stop and talk to them and have a picture taken. That's who he was. He was. It was tiring. I know he got tired, but he would do as much as he could. Then he would say, David, I think maybe we better go to the. Yeah, I'm getting tired. At any rate, yes, he did a lot of those commencement speeches. other phone is ringing, but I think I will let my wife pick it up. So we'll just continue on. All right.
Well, that'll be great. You know, and I'm having such a wonderful time. And when you line up these Zooms, I thought, oh, well, I'll line it up for 90 minutes and that would give us plenty of time. And you know, we're already down to 14. And so I wanted to have a section where I asked you the favorites question, okay?
Okay.
And so this was going to be a little bit more of a jam-packed, okay?
Okay.
And just bear with me, and I think it'll be fun. I'll ask you, everything is, well, what was your favorite? And then you fill in the blanks. Are you ready, Mr. McFeeley?
Well, I'll do my best.
What is your favorite part of the documentary Speedy Delivery?
Oh boy. Oh, all of it. But I loved meeting the children. And there's a section there in the documentary where I'm at I think it's at a park that just opened its merry-go-round, a small community park. And I went there for the opening that day, and I met a lot of families who came to ride the merry-go-round. And I enjoyed meeting them and hearing their stories. I think that was my favorite part of that documentary, which in case your viewers don't know, it's called Speedy Delivery. It's a documentary about my years working on the neighborhood.
And it's wonderful. Here's your next favorite.
Okay.
Your favorite part of the hit documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Oh boy, let me see. Oh, there's a lot of favorite parts, but I think within that documentary, and I think they kept it in. The crew played a trick on Mr. Rogers and changed his shoes from us. And he's such a good sport. What you see in that trick that they played on him, they put a smaller pair of shoes in place of the ones he puts on and didn't tell him. And he began to close the program, and he couldn't get his shoes on, and the crew begins to laugh, and he laughs too, and he gets that's my favorite part, because it shows that Fred has got a great sense of humor, and he did. That was the one thing that I think a lot of people didn't understand, how funny he was. He was a very funny man, very quick-witted, and he was a great appreciator too. He appreciated others' other sense of humors too.
Favorite part of the hit movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood?
Oh boy, when I saw, and I guess this is a little, I have to think of me as Mr. McFeeley, but I enjoyed the actor who played McFeeley in the movie, and then the wonderful actor whose name was Chris Cooper had the McFeeley costume on too for a split second. They cut some of that, but I think they were my favorite parts because, in a way, I've been with the program for 50 years, and in a way, they were doing a tribute to Fred through that movie, and they included McFeeley, and that made me feel very good that I was a big part of the history of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Made me feel very good.
Television.
Well, yeah, I guess in a way.
Absolutely. Favorite episode of the TV show?
Oh boy, I think it's got to be the Wicked Witch of the West visiting Margaret Hamilton.
Margaret Hamilton. Uh-huh.
And she came to help Fred deal with children who are afraid of scary images, and that's on you. That clip is on YouTube somewhere. I thought I saw it. If your viewers get a chance, they can look it up, and they move things around on YouTube a lot, but it's there. It's worth watching.
Favorite moment in a TV show?
Oh boy. Oh, one time I brought in, that came right to me. I brought in a bag of vegetables, and I was pulling one out at a time. This is a cucumber. It was a sort of a identifying lesson. And I pulled out, I said, and this is a rutabaga. Rutabaga, is that what you say,
Yes,
rutabaga?
yes.
And Fred said, "Are you sure, Mr. McFeeley? I think that's an artichoke." And we kept it in. And they said, "Oh well, yeah, you're right, you're right." And the next here's a cabbage and so forth. I just it came out so naturally that we kept it in. And Fred would do that. If there was a mistake, he would keep it and to let children know that adults make mistakes too.
Favorite thing you ever delivered?
Oh my, what was it? Those so many different things. I oh I don't know if it's my favorite, but it was one of the funniest. We were showing frogs, and I brought frog. This is early on, and I was showing frogs because it worked into the theme, and we had them in a container, and it was I guess exciting because when I took the lid off the container, it it jumped way up and out of the camera. And we tried to save the segment, but we couldn't. It was going everywhere. I finally caught the frog. We stopped tape and we did it over again. Of course, it broke Fred up. And there are a lot of outtakes that we have too over the years on a reel, and sometimes we'll show them at a get together. But that was one of my favorite deliveries. So many. I can't remember how many things I delivered.
Favorite song from the show?
Oh, I think it's You I Like. It's You I Like, not the way you do your hair, but it's that song. And it's a lovely song. And Fred wrote over 200 songs. A lot of them he doesn't use or didn't use on the neighborhood, but that is my favorite. Plus, he wrote one that you probably know called If There's Anything You Want, If There's Anything You Need, McFeeley's Delivery Brings It to You. Here is Speed. You've heard of that one, right?
Oh, of course I have. Oh, I was hoping you would sing a couple bars of that one. A favorite Mr. Rogers quote?
Oh, boy. That is a challenge. Can I ask you what your favorite one is? Can you think of one?
I tell you, I never knew, and I don't know if this was a good answer on the exact quote, but until I saw the documentary, I didn't get the 1-4-3 significance.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And that, in case your viewers don't know what that means, 1-4-3 means I love you. And there's two ways to explain it. But Fred told me this story one time. There's a lighthouse in Nantucket area where he summered. And the story to that is back in the days in the late whaling days, I guess that was when Nantucket was a port. And when the fishermen would go out to sea to fish, they'd be out there for weeks. And the families would have the lighthouse blink 1-4-3, I love you, to the husbands and brothers and people who are out fishing. That was the story that Fred told me. I'm abbreviating it, but that's the significance of 1-4-3. Then Fred used it on the program a lot, and then, as you said, so did the documentary.
Favorite character from the land of make-believe?
Oh, I think it's got to be King Friday. I like his humor. He's so pompous, and Lady Elaine can level him just by but every puppet is a facet of a child's personality. The king, in a way, is very is the authority figure, and Daniel Tiger is the shy child, and X the owl is the child that wants to learn, anxious to learn and know what's happening around him. Lady Elaine is mischievous, and so forth. So they all serve a purpose in a storytelling. And if there's a story about somebody being shy, Daniel Tiger is in the script. So I think King Friday's my favorite. And Fred's humor comes out in King Friday too. Sometimes he'll say very pompous things through King Friday. So that's my favorite, King Friday.
Favorite themed week?
Themed week, you said?
Yes.
I think it was the superheroes week. We did a week on superheroes. And not only is it my favorite because it was also my idea too, but we visited the Incredible Hulk studios. You never would think the Incredible Hulk and Mr. Rogers would be on the same TV program, but we again wanted to show or demystify scary images. So we went to the Universal Studios and saw Lou Ferrigno, the Hulk, get into his makeup and to show children the process. And Fred wrote a song because what's the song? You probably heard of it. About feelings, about scary feelings. Scary, mad feelings don't make things come true as one. At any rate, how it all started was my daughter inadvertently, when she was 3 years old, saw The Incredible Hulk. It came on in the evening, and she was down just flipping TV and saw it, and she had nightmares. So I said to Fred, maybe there's something we can do about superheroes and scary images, so letting the children know it's pretend again, like the Wicked Witch. And we did. And so I think that's my favorite. Not that it was so obvious what we were doing, and I think it's very helpful to explain the scary parts of images for young children. A 12-year-old knows that Incredible Hulk is not real, but a 3 and 4-year-old might not. So that's my favorite week.
Sadly, I'm down to 1 minute, so I'm going to close with this.
Okay.
Your personal favorite memory with you and Mr. Rogers?
Oh, boy. Well, Fred was a vegetarian. And I remember when we would go on shoots on locations, the crew would go off to a restaurant, but Fred would want to go to a restaurant that dealt more with vegetarian foods. So I'd go with him. And at the time, I was still eating meat, but observing him and his rationale for being a vegetarian, I would go with him, and now I'm a vegetarian. I think I learned a lot from his vegetarianism. It's health, but it's also philosophical too. And I think that would be my favorite memory. The first time I went to the vegetarian restaurant with him.
That is so wonderful. David Newell, Mr. McFeeley, thank you so very much. This time has been precious.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to count to 3 and we'll both say Speedy Delivery, all right?
Okay, I'm
Here
ready.
we go. 1, 2, 3. Speedy Delivery.
Thank you. One day we'll have to get you to Greensburg, Indiana.
Okay, I'll do that. We'll do it. Speedy Delivery. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.